What a day. You go ahead and turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 12. We're going to be all over that chapter in just a few minutes. Let me ask you a question as we get started. Do you believe that history repeats itself? Have you ever heard that statement, that history repeats itself? You believe that? You believe that happens, that history repeats itself? The quote that I have heard most often about history repeating itself is probably a quote that you have heard as well. It's by a guy named George Santayana. And here's what George had to say about history repeating itself. And I have actually run into this in leadership classes. Those who cannot remember the past are what? Destined to repeat it. You ever hear that? I've heard that for many, many years. That's what George says about history repeating itself. But George is not the only one that's talked about history repeating itself. A guy by the name of Clarence Darrow, I don't know if you remember that name or not. He was a prominent attorney at the turn of the 20th century, tried a number of very high-profile cases in the U.S. in the 20s, 30s, 40s, somewhere in that neighborhood. He was one of the attorneys at the Scopes trial in Dayton, not too far from here. A very astute, articulate man. Here's what he said about history repeating itself. I had not seen this one until this week, but now it's on my list. You ready? History repeats itself, period. That's one of the things wrong with history. There's a lot of truth to that. Because there's a lot of history that gets repeated that's not good history. There's a lot of other quotes by actually quite a few people about this common reality of history repeating itself, or at least the appearance that history repeats itself. But here's the second question. If history repeats itself, why is that? What causes us to think that history repeats itself? What causes us or causes history to appear like it's repeating itself? What causes that? Well, guess what? There's quotes for that as well. And the first one I want to share with you is a quote by a renowned American philosopher, Mark Twain. Here's what Mark Twain said about history repeating itself. It's not worthwhile to try to keep history from repeating itself. For man's character will always make the preventing of the repetitions impossible. And you know what? I think old Mark is onto something. George Bernard Shaw said this: if history repeats itself and the unexpected always happens, how incapable must man be of learning from experience? Ronald Wright, a renowned Canadian literature person, historian, critic. Every time history repeats itself, the price goes up. I think there's a lot of truth to that as well. But they're not the only ones that wrote about history repeating itself. Look in the book of Ecclesiastes. See what the writer of Ecclesiastes says. You know this. What has been is what will be. What has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. The writer of Ecclesiastes understood this principle before these more contemporary writers started writing about history repeating itself. Do you know why history repeats itself? Mark Twain told us. History repeats itself because human nature does not change. You would think that we would be smart enough to learn from the past. But somehow, some way, we always fail to learn from the past. We fail as groups of people. We fail as individuals. History repeats itself because we as humans have a great tendency not to change our nature no matter how many years goes by. Now that's an important concept for us to grasp this morning. And it's important for this reason. that if that's true, and I believe it is true, and I believe experience proves that that's true, it's important because that means that there's an awful lot we can learn from people who have come before us if we take the time to learn. But it's important for another reason. Because as Jesus taught and talked and interacted with people in the first century, particularly about human nature, which he did, everything he said about human nature applies to us today. It's important for us today. We need to pay attention to it today because things have not changed. One day, Jesus was encountering difficulties with the Jewish religious leaders, the Jewish lawyers, not an uncommon thing. And they were trying to use his words against him. They did that often, trying to trap him, trying to put him in the corner, trying to later, as they moved toward the crucifixion, build a case so they could crucify him. And in Luke 12, against the backdrop of religious leaders nipping at Jesus' heels all day long, against a large crowd that had gathered, look at 12:1, Jesus turned to his disciples and used that chaotic moment as a teaching moment for his disciples. And he offered 4 warnings. We're going to look at all 4 real quick, but we're going to look at one in depth. 4 warnings in Luke 12. And because human nature has not changed since the first century and probably since before then, these warnings are in play for us today. These are not just a story about Jesus talking to somebody that we can go home and forget. These warnings are critically important for us today because human nature doesn't change. But there's another reason they're important for us today, and it's simply this, that the Roman Greco world, the ancient Roman Greco world, was a whole lot like today. I've even read articles where some people say that Christians living in this time period are living in a time period similar to Christians in the first century. For example, in the Greco-Roman world, people were very self-centered. The focus was on self. The focus was on identity. The focus was on status. Does that sound like today? Don't mention any names. In the Greco-Roman world, Christians were marginalized. We see that in the New Testament. As a Christian today, is there sometimes when you read a story, when you hear the news or hear somebody talk, do you feel like maybe you're being marginalized because you're a believer? That was happening in the first century. It happens today. In the Greco-Roman world, people worshiped all kinds of things. There were things that they held in their hand and called idols, but they worshiped Caesar. They worshiped all kinds of things. And I would submit to you today that in our world, in the 21st century, even in Kingston, Tennessee, people worship all kinds of things other than the one true God. There are a lot of similarities between the first century and the 21st century. The first warning I just want to call your attention to is in verses 1 through 3. So chapter 12, 1 through 3. I'm not even going to read it. You can read it when you get home. That's your homework assignment. But it's a warning against being a hypocrite. Jesus is warning his disciples against being a hypocrite. Now think about what I just said about the Greco-Roman world. If you were a citizen in that world, and you were interested in status, you would pump yourself up. You would say good things about yourself. But your life might not match the good things that were said. And that's what hypocrisy is all about. And by the way, did y'all know, this will come as a surprise, there's hypocrites in the church. Did y'all know that? Don't look around. Did you also know that some people say, I'm not going to church because they're a bunch of hypocrites? Well, guess what? There are hypocrites in the church. We do that, don't we? We say one thing in here, and then we go to the ball field and act like something else. Or we go to the grocery store and we fight over the last roll of toilet paper. That happened in COVID days. No wonder we're called hypocrites. But you know what Jesus' warning was? Don't be one. Don't be a hypocrite. Now that's the East Tennessee translation of the chapter 12 passage. Go ahead and read it, but it's pretty close. Jesus said, don't be that way. First warning. Second warning is verses 4 through 7. And that warning is against fearing what man thinks and does. Being consumed with what someone is saying about you, or what someone may do to you, or how they may threaten you. Does that happen today? Yeah. Just ask somebody running for office. Wade, am I right? I just woke him up over there. I'm just kidding. He was awake. He was awake. He was awake. Here's the warning. Again, East Tennessee translation. Don't worry about that guy or that girl, what they're going to say or do. What you better worry about, you better fear God. That's who you better fear. God's got control over your soul. That's who you better fear. That's warning number 2. Warning number 3, verses 8 through 12. Now, I'm assuming y'all are going to go home. You're marking this now. You're going to go home and read this, right? We'll put a pop quiz out on the website this week. Here's the third warning. It's the warning about denying Jesus in front of people. Go back to the Greco-Roman world. If you're worshiping all kinds of stuff, you might deny Jesus. I don't know that guy. I heard one time that a guy named Peter said that. I don't know that guy. But it happens today too. You ever squeezed out of a situation so somebody didn't ask you about church in front of somebody else? You ever mumble your words when somebody says, "Are you a Christian?" After they've downgraded Christians? I don't know. I'm thinking about it. Maybe. Here's Jesus' warning. Again, in East Tennessee translation. Acknowledge me before men. Now, friends, let me say to you, because human nature doesn't change, and because our two worlds are kind of similar, these 3 warnings are in play for us today. They're for us. And we need to heed them. The fourth warning is in verses 13 through 48. It's a long passage. Don't panic. We're not going to, well, we are going to look at it. So, but that's going to be the focus. And again, human nature always being what human nature is, and humans always being what humans are, and humans acting and behaving and speaking as they always have. The fourth warning is this, about worldliness. Jesus warned his disciples about worldliness. Now, if you think about what I said about the Greco-Roman world, you can see that they probably were a worldly culture. If they were consumed with themselves, about their status and about their identity and about who they were and about how much they had, you can imagine that the idea, the concept of worldliness may have been a problem. Have you ever seen a worldly attitude, a worldly perspective in action? You ever seen that? That is a common reality. A person with a worldly perspective is characterized as being fixated, being concentrated, being preoccupied with who? Themselves. Their desires, their perceived needs, or maybe even real needs, their status. You might look at a person like that and say, that person is self-centered. And you may be right. Because they are primarily interested in what they think is best for them and best for the people that they care about, including the accumulation of possessions. The accumulation of possessions. And they are usually less interested in anybody else around them. Now, as I've described the worldly person, the person with a worldly perspective, here's what is probably going through your mind. Names and pictures of people that fit that. When I studied this week, I thought, oh my goodness, I know some of them people. I know some of them people. And candidly, I've been some of them people. There's been times in my life where I've been a worldly person. I've thought that way. I've acted that way. So, a common reality. Chapter 12, verse 13. So Jesus has been dealing with the Pharisees. He's got a large crowd around him. He's got his disciples. He's trying to teach them. And in verse 13, here's what it says. Someone in the crowd said to him, so it'd be like somebody walking through these back doors and yelling the following: Teacher, Pastor, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me. Now, if that happened right now, we would all turn around to see who that person was. And I don't know what happened that day when this person cried out, when he yelled out, but I can imagine that he got some attention. Because what happened in that moment was totally opposite from what had been happening. In the midst of all that was going on, in the midst of dealing with difficult people, in the midst of just dealing with a large crowd, this guy stands up and says, Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance. Now, I call this a common reality because it may not manifest itself like somebody coming through the door, but it does manifest itself. By the way, if anybody in the room is having trouble with a family member about inheritance, I'm not calling you out, so it's okay. Now, there's two characteristics about this person that I think is important for us today, and I want to point those out to you. Because it is a worldly attitude that this person just demonstrated. Teacher, back here, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me. The first thing I want to point out is this, that this person, whoever this person was, thought that this situation about his brother was the most pressing situation in all the world. Enough to interrupt the whole world. Now, I assume for him that it was pressing because it involved money. Because in 21st century, if that happened, it probably did involve money. Remember, human nature doesn't change. This guy was focused on himself. Notice that he didn't say this. Notice that he didn't say, Teacher, would you please show me how to reconcile my relationship with my brother? I don't see that anywhere in Scripture at all. So this outburst seems to have been totally about him and what he wanted. But the second thing I want to point out is this, that this person was appealing to the authority of Jesus to help him get what he wanted. Now, I know nobody in here ever did that, but it is possible. That in our own interest, we would appeal to the authority of Jesus, or we would pray to God to try to get something that we wanted, a common reality, by the way. You and I see this same attitude, the same perspective played out in our families. We see it played out in our workplaces. We see it played out in our work groups. So how does Jesus respond to this common reality of a worldly perspective? Well, here's how he responds. And this is where we're going to dig in. Here's how he responds. He responds by talking to his disciples about embracing an uncommon perspective. We have a common reality, and Jesus responds by talking about an uncommon perspective that needs to be had. A perspective that deals with the kingdom. You can call it a kingdom perspective or an eternal perspective. So what does it mean to have a kingdom or an eternal perspective? Here's what it means. It meant it when Jesus talked about it that day, and it means it today as well. And it means this, that your priority, your first concerns, your best efforts are directed toward kingdom purposes. That's what it means, is to have a kingdom perspective. That's what that means. Said another way, to have a kingdom perspective is to have a kingdom worldview. Now, that word worldview has been used actually quite a bit in the last 2 decades. Leading up to the last couple of decades, it wasn't used a whole lot, but you hear it. We've all heard it. What is a worldview? Here's how it's described. The worldview is the lens. Think of these glasses. It's the lens through which we see the world around us. When you came in the building this morning, you came in here with your worldview. You didn't think about it that way, but you came in with a worldview. Because there is a particular way that you see the world. And it is the way that you interpret the world. That's what your worldview is. It's how you interpret the world. So you see an event, and based on what your worldview is, you make conclusions about what you saw. Sometimes things don't bother us. Sometimes they send us over the moon, and it has to do with your worldview. And the decisions you make are the result of your worldview. But it goes a little bit further, because the decisions drive your actions. Your decisions drive what you say. Your decisions drive how you behave. So this idea of a worldview is critically important. And Jesus is saying, because of this common reality of worldliness, disciples, you need to adopt a kingdom perspective, an eternal perspective, a kingdom worldview, an eternal worldview. Now, there's all kinds of examples of worldliness about us. What about the person that's always worried about having the best toys, the biggest toys, the person fixated on the next and the biggest house, the over-the-top sports fan who is consumed with their team? I love sports, but that's all this person talks about is sports and the stats and the on and on and on and on. The person who is never interested in helping anyone else. The person who always wants to be first in the checkout line. The person who will run over you to get one car in front of you to travel for the next 10,000 miles just because there's one car in front of you. That's a worldly perspective. And Jesus countered that by saying, disciples, you need to adopt a kingdom perspective. So how does Jesus do that? In verse 15. And he said to them, the disciples, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. So the first truth is simply this, that our lives do not consist in the abundance of our possessions. That's the first part of this kingdom perspective, this kingdom worldview. And then he continued with a parable in verse 16. And he, Jesus, told them, the disciples, a parable saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years, relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to them, fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Here's the second truth. You and I are fools. I didn't say it, Jesus said it. My mom always told me not to call somebody a fool. I'm pretty sure I've had my backside attended to for actually using that word back in the day. So, don't tell her I used the word fool. Tell her I was just reading out of the Bible. Okay? But you and I are fools. If all we do is lay up treasure and we're not rich toward God, it is foolish to accumulate possessions and not be rich toward God. Now, what does being rich toward God mean? You might say, well, wait a minute, Gary, I thought God had all the cattle on 1,000 hills. Well, he does. I thought that ultimately God is in control of everything. He is. I thought that God doesn't need anything. He doesn't. So what could it possibly mean for you and I to be rich toward God? Here's what I think it means. It means that you and I make God the priority. That's your choice and my choice. We give God the best. Again, our choice. And you and I are generous toward God's agenda. You see, God has an agenda in the world. Did you know that? I believe he has an agenda here on top of this hill as well. He has an agenda in this community. God is always at work around us. And he has an agenda. And his agenda is focused on his kingdom, moving that kingdom forward until the days of the last days when everything will wrap up. But we're not there yet. So God has an agenda. And being rich toward God means that we contribute to God's agenda. Now, here's what that means in reality. Do you know what God's agenda is? Because we got to know what God's agenda is for us to be rich toward God, so we contribute to his agenda. That means that you and I need to learn how to pray better, and we need to learn how to discern better, which means spending time with him. And that's what being rich toward God means. Now, in all of that description about being rich toward God, I didn't say anything about the description of worldly traits, characteristics, and behaviors, because they're not there. You see, when you have a kingdom perspective, that's what we're focused on. So this second truth is very important. So we are foolish. We are foolish to try to accumulate possessions and not be rich toward God. Now notice I said, and not be rich toward God. I'm not saying that collecting possessions in and of itself is a bad thing. It's all about the attitude. And it's all about our relationship with God. Well, Jesus continued teaching in a way really reminiscent of the Sermon on the Mount. 22 and 23 says, therefore, I tell you, don't be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. Doesn't that sound like Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount? So Luke 12:22, and he said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap, They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Oh, how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do a small thing as that, then why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat, what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give to the needy, provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in heaven that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be as well. This next truth is so important. Rather than focusing so much on our own needs, be attentive to the needs around you. See the difference? A worldly view is my needs. A kingdom view are the needs around you. And he summarized his teaching simply by saying this: for wherever your treasure is, there will be your heart also. If you want to know about a person, you find out what they care the most about, and that's the person. You find out what the treasure is. If you can put your finger on the treasure, you'll find out about the person. And that's why it's important for you and I to have a kingdom perspective. Our treasure needs to be the kingdom and needs to be the things of the kingdom. And that's what Jesus is talking about. That's the warning here to his disciples that day. For where your treasure is, there your heart be also. I'm going to challenge you in just a minute. I'll go ahead and tell you, don't get up and leave yet, okay? So let me start that a little bit early. Do you know where your treasure is? Have you stopped to think about where your treasure really is? Is it the right kind of treasure? Because Jesus said, where your treasure is, that's where your heart is as well. JT, you come on out. Jesus concluded this teaching on embracing a kingdom perspective with another parable and explanation. And he called to the disciples' attention this concept of being ready, of being ready, of being ready. So in Luke 35, he says, stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning. And be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. And truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at the table, and he will come and serve them. If he comes in the second watch or even in the third and he finds them awake, blessed are those servants. But know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left the house to be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And Peter said, well, Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for all? And the Lord said, who then? It's the faithful and wise manager whom his master will set over his household, to give them their portion of food at the proper time. And blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. And if that servant says to himself, my master is delayed in coming, and begins to beat the male and the female servants, and to eat and to drink and to get drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces, put him with the unfaithful. And that servant who knew his master's will but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. Everyone. To whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. The fourth truth is this, that to those who have been given much, much will be required. Said another way, the more capacity we have to move the kingdom of God forward, I'm speaking about individually now, the more capacity we have, the more Jesus requires and the more Jesus expects that we will help his kingdom. That's the expectation. And if we are tied up with a worldly attitude, we can't do that. And that's why Jesus, in this fourth warning about worldliness, think about the words he's used here. They're pretty stark, pretty straightforward, pretty hard-hitting. They sting a little bit, but it's on purpose. It's on purpose. Now, we could have spent a whole lot more time in this passage. We could have dug, actually, probably for days. There's a lot here. We've just hardly touched the top. But we don't have time this morning to dig into this, but I wanted to dig in enough to help us understand a couple of things. One is that human nature never changes. And human nature says that humans have a great tendency toward worldliness. You don't have to raise your hand, but we could all do that because we've been there. We know what it's like. And we need to be reminded about what Jesus taught about human nature. We need to be reminded often about that. And so we've looked at what Jesus has taught about human nature, and we've looked at how he countered that with this idea of an uncommon perspective. It's not common to have the perspective that Jesus is talking about. If you don't believe me, get a pencil and piece of paper and go to your favorite store, go stand on the sidewalk and start talking to people about this and see where they are. They're going to look at you funny when you say that your priority is other people. When you say that your priority is a cause that they don't see the benefit of. When you say that you have discerned that God's agenda is this, this, and this, and that's where you're going to focus, they're going to look at you funny. This is an uncommon perspective, folks. But that's Jesus' answer to this common reality of worldliness. And by the way, if there's any misunderstanding, Jesus was not a fan of worldliness. He's not a fan. He didn't like it. So what have we learned this morning? Here's what I would say as a summary of what it looks like to embrace a kingdom perspective. We understand that our life does not consist in the abundance of our possessions. We understand how foolish it is that we are fools if our idea is to store up earthly wealth and not have a rich relationship with God. Embracing a kingdom perspective means that we need to be attentive to the needs around us, outside of us, the needs of other people. Remember that our hearts will be aligned with the things that we care the most about. You can't hide it. I can't hide it. And that everyone to whom much is given. And by the way, by the world standards, everyone in this room has been given much. And Jesus said, everyone to whom much is given, much will be required. That's the idea of a kingdom perspective. Now, you've heard me say this before, that you and I are gifted with, we are given a small sliver of time in the expanse of all of history. And if you look at it, it's just a little bitty bit. It's not much in a big picture. We think we're going to live a long time. Well, it's not a long time. It'll be here and gone, and we'll be gone. But if you are a Jesus follower in the room this morning, here's what Jesus expects, that you will use your sliver of time to advance his kingdom. And the question is this: are you making the most of your time? Are you making the most of your resources for his kingdom? You see, Jesus gauges and measures our affections for him by our affections for the world. For those of you who have math mind, that's an inverse proportional arrangement. I see Paul over here grinning. Am I right? Did I get that right? I think I got that right. Thank you. So here's what that looks like. The more you care about the world, the less you're going to care about Jesus. Just saying. And the more you focus on the kingdom, the less you're going to care about the world. And Jesus gauges and he measures our affections for him by our affections for the world. And as a church, he does exactly the same thing. He looks at us as his church on this hill that he has placed here to be part of this community and to provide this community with who he is. That's our job, by the way, to be his ambassadors, to be his messengers. And he gauges, as a church, our affections for him by the affections that we have for the world. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I want you to just bow your heads. I told you this was coming. I'm going to ask you to do something right now. I'm going to ask you where you're seated to commit right now to step away from whatever is worldly in your life. This is a common reality, this idea of worldliness. So I've got some, you got some, but I'm going to ask you to step away from those things, and I'm going to ask you this morning to commit to embrace a kingdom perspective for your whole life, for the rest of your life. To embrace this uncommon perspective, to address this common reality. Our impact as an individual and as a church will only be as great as our embrace of a kingdom perspective. Father, we love you. The truth of your word cuts deep sometimes, but we need it. We need to be reminded. Father, may it be said of all of us that today was the day that we stepped away from whatever was worldly in our lives and we embraced in a much bigger way, a stronger way. We embraced the uncommon perspective of being kingdom focused. I ask these things in Jesus' name.